to thank everyone for joining us today for the All Bugs Good and Bad webinar series. We're going to be talking about pollinators today. And to start us off, we're going to have Dr. Jim Tu talk about the insect pollinator decline issue. He is a honeybee specialist. Then we'll follow Dr. Tu with Sallie Lee. She's an Urban Regional Extension agent, and she'll be talking about helping pollinators cope with pesticides. Then Jack Rowe, a regional extension agent, will talk about pollinators, life and death in the city, and following up with the conclusion today will be native bees, what's all the buzz about, by Dani Carroll. All of these represent the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. And we are thankful for having each one of them. Dr. Tu, we're going to turn it over to you and let you take it away. Thank you for all of your participation.
Hello, folks. I'm Jim Tu, honeybee specialist for the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. And I'd like to start off telling you straight up, we've got just a few minutes to explain that this is a complex issue. Many changes are involved, and sometimes I suspect that all the reasons are not exactly known. A lot of things have changed. Beekeeping used to be a very traditional, expected, we can give you some things to do. You follow those things by the number, and you'll probably have a happy ending. Those days begin to go away back in the 80s, and we're in a new world now. So all the reasons for the foment in our bee world, both native and honeybee world, they're not always clearly known. There's a lot of noise, a lot of conjecture, a lot of things in the news, and that's a good thing. Brings attention to beekeeping. And it clearly shows the public that we are struggling. So this web traffic is an excellent thing. It distributes information. It promotes our cause. But it also sometimes promotes information that's maybe not be as correct as we'd like for it to be. So let the beekeeper, let the consumer beware. This is a contorted issue that we're still sorting out. We've got a lot of new industry relationships too. We've got some of the chemical companies now that are actually doing bee research work, and we got a lot of new beekeepers. So I'm telling you all this because the industry that we've always called traditional beekeeping is really evolving and really changing, and we're struggling to keep up. It's exciting, but it's not what it used to be. In no order of priority, the things, some of the issues that we know that cause us grief and concern. Number one, food quality and availability. My dad, a beekeeper before me, always assumed, just put a beehive out here, it'll be fine. They'll go find what they need. They'll bring in some surplus honey. Life will be great. That still occurs, but it's not as much as it used to be. That wholesome pollen and nectar source may in fact have been weeds. We call weeds in our lawn, on our roadsides, and our fields, and we've done a good job taking those off. And not only are some of those sources declining, but honeybees and native bees are not the only insects that need those sources for food. Competition is abundant for these food sources. And it may be surprising to learn that not all plants that produce pollen and nectar actually encourage all bees to come forage on those blossoms. Some plants produce toxic food sources for particular insects, and in doing so, select for other insects to do the pollination work. So our bees have to learn to deal with that, tolerate that. This wax comb in the picture here on my right can show you that some of the comb is dark, some of the pollen doesn't look fresh. That may or may not be from these issues, but certainly that wax darkening is in partial relationship to absorbing some of these toxins, either man-produced or naturally produced. So these protein food sources are increasingly hard to find, especially in areas of monocultures. Down in my lower slide there where I'm showing some apple blossoms, bees are going to get really anywhere from 3 to 10 great days on those apple blooms. But for us, it'd be like having the same meal 3 times a day, 10 to 8 days. So they don't have the diversity on these monocultures. Beekeepers listening in, it's a common thing. Now, expect to have to feed your bees and to care for them more than you ever thought possible, both carbohydrates and supplemental protein. I tell you, the topic that has just been a topic forever and a day, I'm going to have some other presenters discuss this in detail more than I. We've divided this into two worlds now since the 80s. We've got pesticides within the hive. That's a complex chemistry procedure that beekeepers have had to use to control pests, particularly mites. And I can tell you that anything you put in the hive, clinicians can find in that wax comb. So this has unclear effects. We're not really sure, when this comb should be replaced, what's going on with that. No standard procedures yet. So you got to do something, but be careful with what you do. Pesticides outside the hive, this is an issue for some of you there that are really convinced that pesticides are the issue. Sometimes they are, sometimes maybe they're not. In either case, there's few safe places to move, and so all we can do is continue to encourage applicators. We've got bees here, and that bees are valuable to us. They know that. I mean, certainly they know it. How could they not know it? So consequently, we have to deal now with issues inside the hive and pesticides outside the hive. And this is not going to be a situation that really goes away anytime soon. So we've got to figure out ways to cooperate and exist in the world that we now have. After discussing all this, I need to tell you that we've never really eliminated any other disease whatsoever. So all the normal things that have given our bees grief, even before we had pesticides, are still out there giving our bees grief. So I've just listed a few. Nosema, viruses have always been an issue that to this day we can't do anything about. Bacteria, primarily American foul brood, probably going to affect anywhere from a low percentage up to maybe 20%. We used to use antibiotics a lot. That has really dropped back a lot as we have figured out that maybe antibiotics don't do great things for the bee's gut. And to make it worse, I got a colony here on the left, the one that has all the fecal spotting, has clearly got some problems, and yet the bee on the right has some kind of viral issue. So the beekeeper sometimes has to deal with blended or mixed issues that help them cause confusion on exactly what's going on there. We have pathogens. Actually, we could talk about this varroa mite situation for probably a couple of days straight. This has been the biggest thing that's ever happened to beekeeping. And I'm old enough to remember when scientists were saying that Africanized bees were the biggest thing that ever happened to beekeeping. But this varroa thing, boy, this has really been a fight. The scientists of the world have given it their best shot, and varroa's head is bloodied, but it's unbowed. It's still here. So even those of you who keep bees and say, well, I don't have to treat that much, my bees seem to be okay, you need to still be alert because the damage that varroa does is certainly bad enough, the feeding damage. The primary thing we're concerned about is that some of these mites vector really deadly virus particles that are much worse than the mechanical feeding damage itself. So even if you don't think you have an issue, watch, be careful, treat as you think you need to. Small hive beetles, larger animals, all of these things tend to cause bees problems that we have to deal with as much as we can to help them, and the bees, as best they can, fight it off. Wow, this is not a natural bee situation. It's amazing that bees could tolerate and exist in these two pictures I'm showing. Nothing about this is a hollow tree in the woods, and yet we profoundly depend on this aspect of our beekeeping industry to provide pollination services for us. This long-distance confinement really can't be good. It brings on robbing and behavioral stress. Queens are hard to manage. You've really got to be a competent beekeeper and have years of experience to keep bees like this. These bees are very important to us, and in many cases, they're the ones that are quite stressed. Everything I've discussed so far kind of comes to this environmental thing, bee in a beehive. Right here in my backyard, cornfield out there one year, soybeans the next. These bees have to go out across this increasingly large area of food scarcity. They have to compete, find the food, not always the quality food that they want. Sometimes my bees are next door in the bird feeder, can't find clean water. lethal and sublethal pesticide exposure. This just goes on and on. But the ultimate insult is that habitat scarcity is also an issue. These bees simply can't find a place to live. We've changed. We don't golf. We don't woodwork, but we do try to keep bees more. But many times people don't fully understand the natural need of bees and what it takes to produce the food shown in that lower left picture. But people have really come to beekeeping. These people can do a lot to help bees. It's not as dire as my first few slides have made it sound. Plant something for bees. Others are going to talk about that. Put out native blocks for native bees. Others are going to talk about that. So be as helpful as you can. Things have changed, and consequently, we have to change along with it. My points have been food quality and availability, pesticides both inside and outside the hive, natural pathogens and diseases, parasites, management stress, societal changes. Those are some of the primary issues that make our bee populations, both native and managed, stressed. Sallie, please take it from here.
All right. Can you all hear me? Well, you're muted, so you can't say that. Okay, I'm going to advance my slide here. And I'm coming from the perspective of a home grounds extension agent, which means I don't deal as much with commercial or forestry issues. I deal with that group of people who, as a group, are probably the worst offenders when it comes to the incorrect or the misuse, abuse of pesticides, and we need some of them. I suspect we always will. But one of the things I want to get to today is some of the products that we use routinely and very seldom think about when we purchase them or use them are the ones that are environmentally questionable, not just for honeybees. As Dr. Tu pointed out, we're focusing on the honeybees as the pollinators, but a lot of our native bees are experiencing some of the same challenges. So if we address issues for one set, we're also indirectly addressing them for another. We see some of this information on labels already. Very open or very clear about the effect of the particular material, but one of the things we don't do very often or often enough is read and follow the label. And I don't know how many of you say that to your contacts or your callers, but I say it a lot. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand or to gather the impact of not doing what the label suggests or not following the recommendations. And in this case, if you see a skull and crossbones, my initial response would be, uh-oh, that looks kind of dangerous, but sometimes that doesn't do much good, and we continue on with what you're doing. In this case, this is a permethrin or permethrin, a spray that kills honeybees via contact or via stomach. That's like a double whammy for them. And we'll look at a few more of these. But this goes back to something Dr. Tu said. We have lost a lot of our wild or feral bees in the past 50 years. In fact, some statistics indicate we've probably lost 90% of them. That's a huge number. Even our managed bee colonies, which are those hives we see, they have declined by as much as 2/3. And of course, the pollination the bees are associated with is of huge importance to us now and in the future. Pesticide misuse impact to managed and native feral bees. That is, again, it's not the only stressor. It's not the only thing that's going on with the bees. We cannot point to pesticide misuse or pesticides in general and say, oh, that's what's killing the bees. That's not the only thing. but it is a component. And as a home grounds agent, I see it all too often. And in fact, I think Jack is going to talk about the urban environment, so I won't do too much with that. But we treat, as a culture, we treat lawns for things that the honeybees and some of our other bees need early in the season. Hey, how do I get rid of the dandelions in my yard? I get that call at least once every 2 or 3 days. Well, for us, it's not a good thing. For the bees, it's one of their first food sources. So there we have a problem. It's a weed to us, it's food to them. And if we herbicide them away, that's not even a pesticide. That's not even an insecticide we're using. That's an herbicide, which is just removing the food source instead of directly killing the honeybee. Okay, the pesticide groups that the honeybees are most likely to encounter, and I dare say other bees as well, you've got the insecticides, those that are both organic, inorganic, and natural. You've got insect growth regulators, which are also becoming, I've read a little more research about them lately. And then, of course, you've got the herbicides, which are not only harmful to the bees if they come in direct contact with the herbicides, but it's also a way to remove a food source. And then the fungicides, which are there, and sometimes we talk about the combination of these different products being like a toxic soup, where one alone might not be as bad as in combination with others. Pesticides and pollinators, there again we have the issue of herbicide use leading to severe reduction of forage on cultivated and wild lands and farmlands. Then the hybridization is another thing that's sort of interest to me, because a lot of homeowners, when they're planting materials in their yards, are looking for the biggest, best, newest. And in that hybridization process, we have found that some of the plants, as we go away from the original or the native version, we have lost some of the nectar or pollen sources that the honeybees were using as food to begin with. There is even a new, you all may know this, there's a sunflower out now that has no pollen. It's a pollenless sunflower, produced or created so you could put the sunflower on your tablecloth and it wouldn't dump that yellow stuff all over it. How convenient, but not much good for the bees. These are some of the hazardous products, and they can be, I know that one of the issues of pesticides and pollinators is the timing of the pesticide application. We say if you've got to apply something, use the least toxic formulation, and then apply it. You either see early morning, or late in the day. I'm not as sure about the early morning, because I see bees out pretty darn up with the sun type things. But if it's got to be used, the timing of application will help keep some of that away from the pollinators, from the bees. Some of these products, 7 comes in several, the Carbaryl, which is the brand name 7, comes in several different formulations. And Dr. Tu referred to this too. Some formulations are more toxic than others. But when you look when you look under their counters or in their garages, most of the formulations there, the ones that are most frequently purchased, are the ones that are most likely to be a problem for the pollinators, for the honeybees. I look at that list and think of how many things I've got or I have had in my garage, and I look at the 7 and kind of shudder. Efforts have been made to reduce pesticides, impacts on pollinators, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about some of the EPA's new labeling. And in 2013, they instituted the Bee Advisory Box, which was an effort to work with pesticide manufacturers and put out labels that were clearer to the end user, that included routes of exposure and things like spray drift precautions. And these were supposed to apply to some of the neonicotinoids, but it's like anything else. If the end user does not pick up that label or pick up that product and read the label and even understand the label, then the label it's an effort, but we still have, at least in my estimation, we have a lot of folks out there using these products that say, I don't understand what the label said, it was too complicated for me to understand, or that print was so small I couldn't read it. Well, those things may be true, but the fact of the matter is, we're still having a lot of this lack of comprehension, and label following is affecting the pollinators, the bees in particular. And the bees are really, one of the reasons they're so vulnerable is they've got these furry, hairy little bodies. And a lot of this stuff, like these dusts, some of the formulations stick to them just like pollen. So when we understand what the bees are doing and what the pesticides are doing, there are some movements to work with the manufacturers to trend more toward formulations that are less likely to be attractive to or be a problem for the pollinators, for the bees. I even wanted to point out that even the organic approved pesticides, excuse me, there are still some issues with them. And you will find that not every expert agrees on the toxicity of all of these products. I found several different opinions associated with some of these things. Like diatomaceous earth is supposed to be very non-toxic, but it's also a dust. So if the bees get in it, that's one of the most, that formulation is hard for them to, that's not easy for them to get out of. It's a problem. Horticultural oils, that you got a little harmful on contact, so apply that late in the evening because it will dry overnight. Again, following these recommendations will help, but if they're ignored, then we really don't have much of we're not helping much. Common formulations, and this is something that we do talk about and we try to introduce to homeowners when we suggest the best ones or the worst ones. And you can see on the left, most of the formulations, I tried to list them. One of the newer ones, and it's not new, but it hadn't been around as long as some formulations, it's a microencapsulated. And that is supposed to be, in many cases, about the size of some of the pollen grains. So we've got some things out there that probably are very useful as far as human convenience, but are not very safe as far as the honeybee pollinators are. You'll notice that the solutions and the emulsifiable concentrates, the ECs, are the best formulations to use. They can dry quickly. They don't leave a powdery residue, which some of these do, and the bees can still get into them. The granules are similar to dust, but they're larger, so they have a different issue. And because the granules, are applied to soil normally and not usually used on blooming plants because of those issues, they tend to be less hazardous. The dusts and the wettable powders, on the other hand, adhere to the hairs on the surface of the honeybees, where they can not only damage those bees, but they can be transferred back to the hive and stored with the pollen. And again, pesticides are not the only reason colonies collapse. They're just one that I work with a lot and am therefore very aware of. Most toxics, again, we've got the list on the right. Some of those we don't use much anymore, but on the left, very basic. Don't spray during bloom periods. A lot of folks with orchards, even home orchards, if they're spraying for some sort of peach borer or other problem, and they spray when the bees are feeding, that's it. Not only will the bees many times be impacted negatively, they might not get much fruit because the pollinators aren't able to do their job. If you got to use one with a high LD50 and a short residual activity, or choose a residual that is okay. It's under 8 hours for it to wear off, and spray it at night. And Jack, you're up.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right. This might look a little odd. The background used to be black. I'm going to talk a little bit about beekeeping and also folks who use some native pollinators like mason bees. Some people are keeping mason bees in little platforms of tubes as pets. This all starts off in the subdivision in the city and kind of like a high-flown goal. Everybody's very happy about it. They're really excited to embark in a new hobby, and they're just generally not aware of what they might be getting into. Dr. Chu and Ms. Lee have covered very ably some of those hazards. Right here in these pictures, you can see some of the start off. We've got the daydream. You're going to feed your grandchild some honey. You've got a hive, and your garden is going to be more fruitful than it ever was. But what they're not quite prepared for is where they've usually placed them. We're not talking about traditional apiculture anymore. We're not talking about mason bees being used to pollinate alfalfa fields. We have these creatures inside our city. And what goes on there mostly is starvation because of a lack of food sources. If you notice on the lower left-hand corner, average home lawn in central southern Alabama. There are a lot of pine trees. There's a lot of evergreen shrubbery. There are some nicely kept lawns, and that's about it. There's in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice the center point where a set of hives that I've looked over exists. There's nothing else around. Are there open fields? No. Are there any some uniquely gardened areas? Is there a park with some meadowlands? Nothing like that at all. So starvation becomes a big deal if you're going to maintain any kind of pollinator in the city. A moment, little arrow. All right, now we all know about the ranges that bees can travel over. Most of the bees are trying their best to stay within a half mile of their nesting or hive site. And this is actually the place where my own bees are kept in Mobile, Alabama. Right here we have the center point. It's over top of my house. First circle is 1.5 miles. Second circle is 2 miles. That's roughly the greatest range I think they're moving. One of the things to consider is not only is it hard for them to forage for food in this area, think about all the other dangers that they're crossing. Multiple roads. I'm talking windshields and guardrails here. Large asphalted and concreted areas, rooftops, resting sites are going to be a problem. The bees are going to be in the middle of hot, dry, desert-like areas. There's going to be air pollution, and the air is going to be stirred by the movement of traffic throughout this region. All right? So the outcome of all this is that you're going to have to feed your bees. Just think about it, always. There's going to be a spring flow when all the flowers are blooming and the bees are out there having their good time. The apple trees are in bloom, the pear trees are in bloom, crab apples. All of these things are there for the bees, but they're only there for a couple of weeks. Think about that. You're going to need to be ready with something like syrup. With protein patties, you're going to have to supplement feeding your bees. Lots of plans to do this. You can use all kinds of things from hummingbird feeders all the way down to nicely built top feeder boxes for honeybee hives, or just plain dishes of sugar. I've seen that used by many beekeepers. That would work out well not only for your honeybees, but also for the native pollinators in the area. If you don't feed after bloom times, you're probably going to have very, very weak hives. All right. The next thing up that we're going to have to deal with, dehydration. Once again, here we are looking down on Mobile. And the right-hand picture is a picture of a dog waterer in my neighborhood. I'm very sorry, Mr. Neighbor, but yay, there are my bees. They really need something to drink. Provide a clean water source, not only for your bees, but also for the nearby native pollinators. They have nothing else to feed on. A lot of swimming pools these days are now salt treated. They have a salinity akin to seawater, and the bees will want to try and feed on that. They're going to feed at dripping taps. They're going to feed at dog bowls. They're going to feed at various saucers of people's potted plants. This puts you in the way of people's fears, especially in a crowded city area like this. This is an awfully important thing. Don't make your bees travel far. Don't make your bees make a bad selection. Do them a favor and make certain that they have a lot of water nearby so that they can maintain their hives themselves. And then, of course, we have the death part, death by landscaping. We hear a lot about agriculture and the number of chemicals used in agriculture, but what we don't tend to think about is the number of compounds that are used around people's homes. Generally, the more highly kept the lawn, more highly kept the home, the more likely it is to be toxic to the insects around you, especially things like pollinators and predator insects that have to travel long distances or forage around in an area to find their sustenance. A really heavily maintained lawn like this one here in Potomac, Maryland, up here at the top, and at these townhomes over in Fairfax, Virginia, these are going to be treated multiple times a year. Fertilizers, salts, think about that. Herbicides, insecticides, all of these things will be going down on these areas, and your bees have a chance to sample all of them. So, make certain that you've got someplace nearby. Stop treating your own lawns. Talk to your neighbors. See if you can situate your hives someplace where they're more likely to be in contact with untreated areas rather than treated. All right, next up, death by public health. Yes, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are always on our mind down here in Alabama because none of us wants equine encephalitis, none of us wants West Nile disease, and these days the fear of dengue is beginning to become a reality. The city of Mobile treats all the time. They have to. They're usually using a pyrethroid insecticide, usually bifenthrin, and they're going to miss this out to knock down adult feeding female mosquitoes. Call your health department. If your city treats for mosquitoes, you're definitely going to want to call them, and they will usually have an opt-out program, or they will have a program in which the insecticides will be applied after dark for the sake of your bees. Generally, most health departments in most cities I've dealt with are very friendly about this, and they're very used to being asked by beekeepers not to spray during the day. All right, death by easily treated problems. I deal a lot with the working beekeeper, somebody who has a job someplace else, and then they have some hives in their backyard. Hello, I am one. And so, easily treated problems that you need to stay on top of. The difficulty of beekeeping these days is to have all these new problems. These new problems take a lot of watching. And so if you're not keeping an eye on your mite population, if you're not keeping an eye on the small hive beetle, you could end up having problems like that poor cone right there in the middle. So the thing I see a lot are homeowners who just simply blanked on taking care of their mite problems. People who didn't check their comb. People who didn't look in there to find out, oh my goodness, there's some wet moths in here that we need to get rid of. If you don't treat these problems, you're more likely than not going to have another hit against your hive, and you'll likely lose them. I see a lot of crashed hives. Almost all of them crashed because of something easily treated. All right, and here's the biggie. The biggie, you're keeping bees around a lot of people. Should you be or not, right? If you hurt somebody's fur baby, if you get somebody's kid stung, you can bet that you will end up there on the right in front of the city council someplace. Make certain you know your neighbors and laws. Warn some people. Make certain that you're up with local codes. Not all cities have beekeeping codes. Some of them will the moment somebody gets stung. So be careful where you place your hives. Think about the guard radius on your hives and how likely they are to be disturbed. Folks can be very picky. People believe things about bees. They all think that they're actually allergic to bee stings when in fact they're just having normal reactions. Most of the time people are just simply very caring. One sting to a child is usually enough to drown somebody in a lawsuit. So behave with caution out there, folks. And that brings me to my last thoughts on this topic, swarming. People who keep bees in the highly populated areas need to control the hives' need to swarm, right? You're going to need to split. You're going to need to make nukes. You need to know what it looks like when a bee hive is going to swarm. You need to be inspecting them, not only for those problems, but also to make certain that you don't have clusters of bees hanging out in people's trees, causing a general riot in the area. I've had a couple of occasions in which people have called having locked their homes and actually sealed their doors with duct tape because they were terrified of a honeybee swarm that was outside of their house. And what in heavens could they possibly do? Will you save me? So this is a really important responsibility, a moral thing even, that a person who's keeping bees is willing to do. Get in there, check, make certain your bees don't be somebody else. You could find yourself in a situation like this where your bees are hanging out over top of someone's home and you're going to need specialized equipment to try and get them back before somebody will take the duct tape off of their doors and come out and talk to you. So all of these things are just small ideas, but remember always, your bees are going to have a harder time foraging in suburban and urban areas. They're going to come in contact with a lot of toxins, not necessarily of agricultural types, but mere pollutants that we throw out there all the time. Think chlorine in swimming pools, salty swimming pools, sewage, oil. If they're trying to drink water from a mud puddle, it's going to have automobile oil in it, most likely, in any of these areas. So, make certain that you feed the bees. You're not going to have all the flowers out there. Make sure they have some supplemental nutrition, and always check on them. They're going to become a thing of constant care. You got into this because you loved them and you wanted to do right. It's time to do right. So thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions anyone has.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. This great presentation, y'all, so far. Today, I kind of wanted to introduce everyone to some of the other workhorses behind the pollination of our food, and that's some of our natives. You know, a lot of time I'm in a classroom with 50 or 60 people, and I can ask how many beekeepers are in the crowd. And sometimes 1 or 2, 3 or 4 might raise their hands, but then I remind everybody in there that they are all beekeepers, because on some level, somewhere in their landscape, somewhere in their gardens, I promise there's habitat for some of our natives. And that's kind of some of the issues that I wanted to bring up today. Native bees are really some of our most valuable pollinators. Native bees are very diverse. They're huge. We're all familiar, well, I'm very familiar right now with the large carpenter bees, as well as some of the very small sweat bees. So they're big, they're tiny. Some of them wake up early in the morning. Some of them are up late at night. Some of them come out in the spring, and some of them come out in the fall. So while some of them are generalists, many of them visit very specific flowers, and it makes them very efficient at pollination purposes. For example, just looking at the slide right now, we can take tomatoes as an example. Most of us know that these flowers are they're self-fertile, so that they can pollinate themselves. But it does take wind. If you're in a tomato greenhouse, you might know that they have, or see the sticks, the vibrating wands that they may use to help get that pollen to shake down, because in the tomatoes, the pollen is really deep. But it's our native bombus species, or our bumblebees, that are able to vibrate these flowers at the right frequency. And what it does is that really just coaxes the the pollen out of the flower. There has been a lot of research done on this, and let's take one of the smaller cherry tomatoes like a sun gold, but fruit set is 45% higher when bumblebees versus wind actually pollinated the flower. And not only that, but the fruit weight doubled in size when our native bees were allowed to do the pollination. We can say if you see on the right, squash, that's a big one. There's a couple of genre of native squash bees, but one of them, Papinapes, they visit flowers. They move quickly. They don't hang around, and it just makes them very, very efficient pollinators. Our native bees, yes, Sally, I just saw that. That's the buzz pollination, the sonification that the bumblebees provide. And that's the same thing with our southeastern bumblebee, southeastern blueberry bee as well. It's a small bee, but it actually buzz pollinates the blueberry bushes. We can kind of divide these, and I want y'all to be able to see this in your own landscape, because you might not have a hive of honeybees behind your house, but I promise you, somewhere around, you have these native bees, and being able to identify the habitat will allow you to, know that these areas might be more pesticide sensitive than some of the other ones. But our native species, we can pretty much divide them in 3 different groups. First of all, we can divide them into a social group and a solitary group. And when we think social group, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the honeybee. But of our natives, that bumblebees would be our really on the social group. Out of the rest of them, 70% of our natives are solitary ground nesters. And sometimes these are the bees that scare people when they do see them coming out of the ground, thinking they need to do, go grab a pesticide and do something else about it. The other 30% of our natives, they're going to be more of our wood nesters. They nest in tunnels that maybe other insects have already created. And I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but we are lucky enough in the United States to have over 4,000 species of native pollinators. And yes, I'm from Alabama, but I did want to be able to draw some pictures from different areas across the country. Here we see this is actually an Adrena species. This is one of the mining bees, and this is kind of what their ground nesting hole would look like. This was taken from Colorado. But this is something that homeowners will probably find in their lawns. They could find it underneath their shrubs and different places like that. So, be on the lookout as spring and summer start to roll in for some of these holes so you can, see the habitat in your own yard. Here again, now we have some of the nesters, or the wood nesting or the cavity nesting bees. These bees are a lot different, the life cycle, than a honeybee. And one of the reasons I really want you to look around your landscape and see what you see, these aren't perennial colonies. And for a lot of these, it may only be a mated female that you see in the spring when they first come out. And if something happens to that one native female, really you've just killed the rest of the bees for the rest of the season. And that's one reason I find them important. Again, you can see here, this is like, when I see this cavity nesting right here, I'm thinking of osmia or our orchard mason bee, which is a great pollinator. In fact, to pollinate an acre of fruit, it only takes about 250 orchard mason bees to do the trick. So look around, something we can do. We can retain our snags. We can use plants with hollow stems and different things like that, but just be able to identify where they're coming from. This is a great picture. Another picture from Colorado. These are actually ground digger bees. This is something else that hover bees, too, you can get calls about where they're coming out of the lawns, or in this case, they're coming out of the bare ground. And it's something that, You know, a lot of people always want to go and grab something to spray because they're maybe a little menacing or maybe a little dangerous. They are solitary bees, but when they find a really good place to nest, you're going to see a lot of different nests. Again, these are great bees to have around. They have really long tongues. They're capable of pollinating really deep flowers. So they do a lot of good. This is a gorgeous picture. This is actually a master gardener garden in Wisconsin, and it's a pollinator garden. And I just kind of threw this picture in here so you can see the diversity of plants that they've planted here. I think Dr. T mentioned earlier about eating the same things all the time, 7 days a week. Well, with the diversity of our native bees, like I said earlier, they have different tongue lengths. They come out at different times. Some of them are more efficient on some flowers than others. So instead of giving big plant lists, I think we've listed several times in the chat box where you can find some of these great plant lists. But diversity really is part of the key to maintaining these native pollinators in our own landscape. Now here what you see is a pesticide-friendly corridor. And this is really the same thing that we think about when we think about big farms and we think about hedgerows and different things like that. We know that the honeybee can fly several miles to find food. A lot of our native bees fly anywhere from 2 to 50 feet. So they're not going very far. So when you actually have some native bee habitat, you know, on your own land, in your own landscape, know that they don't forage very far at all. So when we have some of these natural areas, like you're seeing in the picture, utilizing some native plants, using an area that we don't really know, or we don't spray, we don't have to do a lot to, it provides a staircase, if you will, from some of the bees who may be nesting, you see, in the woods and some of the tree cavities or on the bare ground edge of the woods, to be able to come into your own yards and do some foraging. So now, if we can recognize and accept some damage. This picture, of course, has a leaf cutter bee. It's something that people will call the extension office for to say, well, mostly there's damage in the landscape, and we need to figure out what this is and doing something about it. But we need to recognize, and this is what I hope a lot of you go away with, is recognize the habitat, recognize the damage, because this is a great pollinating native bee who's actually doing this damage. And the circular leaf cut, that's what the mother, the mated female, is actually going to use to line her brood cells in a solitary cavity. And again, and Sallie, I think it might have been you that hit on this earlier, pesticides for a lot of folks, when we think about that and we think about pollinators, we think about insecticides. But I too like to think about the herbicides, because a lot of times what we're doing when you hear about the loss of habitat or the loss of food supply, I think of people like me who may go grab a herbicide and say, "Ooh, you know, this bench row needs to be sprayed," or this, and then I go back and a couple of days later, and I go back and I see what I've actually killed off, and it was a lot of flowering plants. So the message I want to get across is take a look. We're all beekeepers, all of us. I promise you have a native bee somewhere in your landscape or garden. And just be aware of the damage, be aware of their habitat, and hopefully, you know, pesticides can be used more wisely when you actually see that you are a beekeeper. Thank you.
This concludes completes our presentation for today. If you will notice the link to our Qualtrics survey, if you would take a few minutes and fill that out when you have time. I'm also posting that in the chat box right now. And if you will take just a few minutes and click on these poll questions that are coming up as well, we would appreciate it. We thank you for attending today and hope you will join us on the first Friday in May for our next All Bugs webinar.
So we have a question in the chat box. What type of water is best for pollinators and other bees? The master gardener has well water with a potassium chloride water softener.
Kathy, this is Jim here. I'll give that the best shot I can. The bees are going to find water anywhere. So as long as the water is not outright toxic, they'll use remarkably dirty water sometimes. And in many cases, when they're around that, what we consider to be dirty water, they're actually using that water as a carrier for other trace elements and minerals. So everything depends. How hot is it? How readily available is other sources of water? What are the colony demands? They can even produce metabolic water so long as they have some honey to digest. But in general, having some kind of water out there is what's critical. And it's going to be multiple sources. Just putting out one watering source doesn't mean that all the bees are going to go that. I've even seen the yellow jackets and some of the paper wasp at these watering sources. But they are also going to continue to go to the neighbor sources, which can be a source of frustration at times. They don't put all their water needs in one bucket. So the primary thing is to have water of some kind available. The bees will make use of it one way or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you speakers. And Ellen, do you have any concluding remarks or do you think we have any more questions we haven't answered?
I didn't have any other remarks. If you do have some unanswered questions that we didn't see in the chat box, or you think of something later, there is an option in the Qualtrics survey for you to enter those questions and someone would get back to you to answer. So thank you all, and everybody have a good weekend.